Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this special edition here on the show. Today we're going to be talking about a huge or potentially huge topic that could have enormous implications for everybody around the world, especially if you live in the West, USA, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or Europe, for example. Because what has been announced recently, as you may have seen, is a potential, and I lean on the word potential here, gold-backed BRICS currency. What does BRICS stand for? It stands for the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. However, what most people aren't aware of when it comes to the BRICS is that it's not just those countries, you see. Yes, they are currently in the alliance, but there are a lot more countries who are currently in either application stage or have shown an interest in joining BRICS. India, for example, is one of those countries. And just think of the population of China, of Russia, of India, of some of these other nations, and you see how big this implication is. Now, how has all of this come about? This is the first question. And how is it that they are looking to create this gold-backed currency? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I think the nail in the coffin for the BRICS nations was the Western sanctions on Russia after the conflict in Ukraine, which we are all aware of now. And I think what's happened is a lot of countries around the world who weren't previously looking to join BRICS are now looking to join BRICS because they have said to themselves, hold on here, we're holding a huge amount of US dollars as treasuries in our central bank. And if we do something wrong or we do something to upset the West, they could just steal all of our money via treasuries or however else they're going to do it, with sanctions and freezing assets and property and such and so forth. So let me answer the big question first straight off the bat here. Will this new currency that the BRICS nations are putting together, will it replace the US dollar? And if so, when will that happen? So we've really got two big subjects to look at there. So firstly, will it replace the US dollar? The answer is probably not, in my personal opinion. I think the US dollar is still reigns supreme. It's still so large that to be replaced by the other nations at this stage, I think would be quite difficult. However, Saudi Arabia, as well as the UAE and a number of other larger countries with a lot of oil money and a lot of wealth, have shown interest in applying for BRICS as well. This is worrying for a lot of reasons, but not only because Saudi Arabia and the military and the hardware, the equipment they have, a lot of that is from the US. They have some very, very advanced weaponry. So if we did go into some sort of conflict here, it's going to be pretty messy, in my opinion, when you have the sheer size of the BRICS nations and then you have the smaller size of the Western nations, but with much better technology and weaponry. But alas, I digress, because we're not talking about military conflict here today. However, they're linked. Let me tell you why they're linked. Because if you look at almost all wars and all conflicts, what do they arise out of? It's money, it's resources, it's energy. That is what most of these, and you can take this back into history. You know I'm a history buff, I always talk about history. And if we look at history, what were most of these conflicts, most of these wars all about? It was resources. Now, whether that was food, it was energy, it was water, whatever you want to look at here. In the modern day, these resources are energy, it's mainly oil and natural gas, as we've seen, and it's money, or more specifically, it's currency. And even more specifically, it's a fiat currency. A fiat currency means it's not backed by anything. It's simply backed by the confidence and branding, I think is the best way. The branding in people's minds. Other people may say it's backed by the US military, for example, if we talk about the world reserve fiat currency. So let's move on to the gold aspect then. Why is this key, and why could this actually change the game for the entire world? Well, China, Russia, a lot of the other central banks have been buying huge quantities of gold, and they've been building and building and building up these reserves, not just the government, central banks, but also the citizens. And this is where you're seeing this sort of tipping point coming in, because what has happened, we've covered this a lot on the channel, so I'm not going to go into great depth, but over the last 2 to 3 years, we've had huge amounts of currency, new currency creation. This was currency that didn't exist anymore via quantitative easing. This is one of the reasons, it's not the entire reason, but this is one of the reasons that we're seeing such high levels of inflation at the moment. Now, I often get asked the question, well, if we've done so much currency creation, why aren't the currencies collapsing? Why is the US dollar not collapsing based on how much new currency was created? What about the euro, the British pound, etc.? The reason you're not seeing what you would have otherwise seen in terms of heavy depreciations, not a collapse, is because each currency is measured against one another. This is what people often overlook. So if you try and compare the US dollar to the euro or the British pound or another currency, you're not measuring two static objects. You're measuring two moving objects, because as US dollars expanded, so did British pounds, so did euros. And that is what we're seeing inadvertently with inflation, which of course tracks the supply of goods and services. I know it's a little complex, so I won't go too deep on this. But the point I'm making is that what is US dollar denominated trade now? 60%, 70%? It sort of varies, but it's at least 60% of the world. Now, if countries like the Middle Eastern countries, the Saudis, UAE, other countries around that region, Russia, China, India, if they stop actually trading oil, energy, etc. in US dollars, which is already happening quite heavily, and they start trading in their own currencies, what you are going to see is a reduction in demand on the US dollar. And that is what makes the US dollar so powerful. It is the demand upon it. It is what people perceive as value within that dollar. They see the strength of the dollar. But that's only there because of the demand aspect behind it. Think of the lessons I've taught you before on supply and demand. So once that demand has reduced, but you've still got a large supply, that is where you're going to have a lot of difficulties. So this is why I say, and this is where it's difficult, because a gold-backed currency of that scale used by that amount of people across those countries is going to be a big competitor. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen straight away, but if the US don't back the dollar to gold later on, I think, and again, I'm not saying it's going to happen straight away, this could take a long time to play out, but I think we could see the death of the dollar. And I know this is probably going to get screenshotted, or someone's going to make a meme or something crazy out of this and take it out of context. But that is what I see. I honestly think we could see the death of the dollar in the future if they continue to just create, whilst demand reduces and whilst other countries are backing their currency to a BRICS currency with gold, because gold is real money. I always talk about this a lot, not as much on YouTube these days or some of the other video platforms, but more in my private community. And everyone knows in there, I do not save fiat currency in my bank account. And that's my business account, my personal accounts. As soon as that comes in, I turn that into allocated gold. And that is how I save my money. Now, yes, there's swings, it goes up, it goes down, the gold price. It doesn't bother me, I don't care, because I know the gold is real money and the currency in the bank account isn't. And I've said this for so many years, and I think the last 2 years have really proven the theory that cash is trash, or should I say fiat currency is trash, because look at the value. 10.5% inflation in the UK right now, 6.5% in the USA. I don't believe any of those figures. It's more like 13% in the USA inflation. UK is more like 20%. That is what happens to fiat currency. It gets destroyed because of central bank and government planners. And people often ask me where I buy my gold and silver and things like that. If you just look below in the description, you'll actually see a link there, or maybe there's a couple of links. But honestly, it's completely up to you where you buy it. Just make sure you do it from a reputable source, because I think what happened with Russia has really, well, there's a lot of lessons I think we can learn from that. But one of the biggest takeaways I got from it when I saw that, it only took about a week or two for this to sink into my head, was, hold on, I have money in my business bank account, I have assets. And if that can happen to a country like Russia, then it can happen to someone like me, a private citizen. We've seen this before in other crises as well. Bail-in law we now have, not bail-out law. Banks going into crisis, liquidity crisis, closing the doors, stealing people's money. So is, say, allocated metal perfect solution? No, it's not. The perfect solution is, physical metal in your hand that you hold and you own. It's perfect, but it's not always the best when it comes to security, or if you do have a business, for example, or a business account, or you've inherited some money or something like that, then that is not potentially the best solution for you to have it all under your mattress because of break-ins and other things. But if you think about what's going on right now with the breakdowns of these currencies and the high levels of inflation and all of these are the things that we keep seeing. And then you look at the power of gold and silver as well, and you see that they've been money for thousands of years. If things start to go bad, what would you wish you had? Would you wish you had gold, or would you wish you had a fiat currency that's backed by nothing? Look what's happened in Hungary with their high levels of inflation. Look what happened in Zimbabwe, hyperinflation. Historical examples, the Weimar Republic. We even saw this in ancient Rome, where they actually removed the metal from the coinage. Again, it's the same principle that exists today. And eventually all fiat currencies go to zero. There isn't a single one that's ever survived. So I just want to give you all of these points and these lessons so that you can not only learn from what I'm talking about with this new BRICS currency, but you can apply this lesson to your own life. It's crucially important that you understand finance and economics, because if you don't, you are going to be in the same category of these people in the future. And again, I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow, okay? But this will happen at some point. It's inevitable. It will for certain happen. Where you used to see, like Weimar, we talked about Republic there. Someone wheeled their money down the road in a wheelbarrow, and at the other end, the actual trader said, I don't want the money, I'll take the wheelbarrow because it's worth more. So this is something really important for you to understand. I know most of you have taken my macro and finance course already. If you haven't, the link is again below in the description. Just whatever you do, take my course, learn elsewhere, do however you're going to do it, but please make sure you pay attention to this stuff because it is coming. There are massive changes. Now, I want to continue on with this subject of the BRICS CBDC because there's another thing that no one's talking about, and this is something that I've been thinking on. I like to really think on topics before I talk about them as well, just to see if I can add anything fresh and new that you haven't heard elsewhere. And one thing that I'm thinking about at the moment is, how would this work if all of these countries joined it? And we're talking about not just the BRICS, but all of these other countries who have shown interest in joining. How will that work? Because we know that China is very different to the others. They want a CBDC linked to a social, not a carbon, which tells you something, credit score. Whereas the Western nations, they want a CBDC linked to a social credit score and a carbon credit score. I mean, talk about digital slavery, pretty much game over. 2030, you will own nothing and be happy. Yeah, I think we know where this is going. But with the Chinese talking about this social credit score, and I will make a video on that in the next few weeks, and I'll show you just the sheer terror of this for a Western person, that you're not allowed into certain restaurants or cafes because your social score isn't high enough. Now, I don't see this going through some of these other nations. I really don't. I definitely don't see it with the main BRICS nations. Because if you think about China, they do everything already with their mobile phones. You know, the Alipay and WeChat and other stuff. I don't know, you know, that was a couple of years ago. I don't keep up to date on Chinese payment systems, but they're very familiar with these already. So it's very simple for them to integrate this into their society. So I actually think we're going to see a hybrid system of this BRICS currency that will most likely be backed by gold, and all the BRICS nations using it, but they'll use it in a different way in terms of their CBDC. How, I'm not quite sure yet, but maybe one country will lead the way. Is that going to be China? Is that going to be Russia? I'm not sure at this stage. But there's a couple of other countries, let me just read these out to you, who have been interested in joining. So Iran, again, a huge one because they also have sanctions against them. So they've started trading as well. So you're right now, the West is really pushing these countries together. North Korea as well, there's a lot of talks going on there with BRICS, which is worrying to say the least. We also have Saudi Arabia that we mentioned. We have Brazil and Argentina also talking about the South American nations inadvertently joining BRICS with a Brazil backing. So they're talking about creating a CBDC that could also be gold backed, it's not confirmed yet, for South America to bypass American dollars as well. So this is disturbing. If you don't think this is worrying, then you obviously are completely off the grid. You have your own homestead. You have, you know, tons of gold buried in the garden in small increments. You're going to barter and trade with your neighbors for the rest of your life. You've got all your own food and water source. But for the general population, this is pretty worrying at the sheer speed that this is taking place now. A few other countries then who have showed interest. Argentina we just mentioned, with some of the other South American nations, the UAE, Algeria, Egypt, Bahrain, Indonesia, 2 nations from East Africa, 1 from West Africa. And another big announcement that just came out this week is that the Central Bank of Iran and the Central Bank of Russia are in discussions right now to create a stable coin that will be backed by gold. So they are also looking to do that, and that is in order to bypass Western sanctions. And not just that, if we actually look at, I've got them here, the gold reserves now. So this is from Trading Economics, or a reliable source. It actually said, well, let me just add a caveat to that. It actually says the USA is the largest holder of gold in the world with 8,133 tons. And the reason I'm saying I add a caveat is because there has been no audits, I think is the best word to use here, inspections, checks on these gold reserves. And you've probably heard all of these rumors and the stories about the trucks leaving Fort Knox in the dead of night, and the soldiers saying that they took gold away, and then this gold went to China, and you know, there's all these other stories from going back decades. Who knows if these stories are true? But we do know that a story came out of China saying they had bought a lot of gold from Fort Knox, and what they said was when they tested the gold, it was lead covered in gold. Again, who knows if these stories are true, but they're interesting to hear. But if we look at the next one down, it's Germany, 3,355 ounces, then Italy, then France, and then we get to Russia and China, and then below that is India. Now, I want to bring your attention to something here. Russia, China, and India alone actually hold more than 5,000 tons of gold. 5,000 tons compared to the US claim of holding 8,000 tons. So actually the US, if they really wanted to, could back the US dollar to gold. And you may actually see this. You may see that they have to do this when the competition from a BRICS currency actually comes about. Now, I think we're too early right now for me to make a sort of more complete forecast on that. But I'm definitely giving you a forecast right now to watch this. And to watch this very closely, because I do think there's a risk here. I do think this could be a big competitor to the US dollar in the future, and I definitely think it can be a risk to all of us. So with that said, thank you so much for watching this video today. Please share it, click the thumbs up, whatever you want to do. And thank you so much for watching. Take care. God bless you guys. And I will see you tomorrow for the weekly walk and talk. See you then.